This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this week's episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, I'm in Chicago, Illinois. The occasion, of course, is the weekend of the Festival of Barrel-Aged Beers, FOBAB. And joining me for this episode is Jacob Sembrano from Cruz, Blanca. Welcome to the podcast, Jacob.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
Yeah, last time I was in Chicago a couple years ago, we were filming some video classes and got a quick visit in over here. We met up and had some tacos and drank some beers. And I have been trying to find time to do a podcast ever since. 2 years later, I was dead set on coming to FOBAB last year. It was on my calendar, and then like 2 weeks before, I just couldn't make it work in the schedule, and I had to bail on it. This year, I am dead set on coming to FOBAB. My first time at FOBAB. And being able to do this podcast with you is another primary reason why the trip was worth it. For those of you that are not as familiar with Cruz Blanca, if you can read the reviews in Craft Beer and Brewing, some fantastic beers like 2021 Ray Gordo scored a 97, Vida Amiga mixed culture beer scored a 96. Ray Cuvée in 2020 scored a 96. Even Freetown Hazy IPA scored a 95. And then, Cruz Blanca Light has a 91. A 91.
We came back shocked. I was shocked by that.
Well, there you go. So we've had some fantastic beers, and just been super impressed. And
Thanks.
I've been trying to just stay in touch with what's going on here at Cruz Blanca. And, over the last couple of months, there's more big growth story for Cruz Blanca as you all are getting into some strategic partnerships and blowing up some of your brands and, kind of moving around and getting out of just this Chicago footprint. We can talk about a little bit of that, but we're definitely going to talk about how you make flavorful beers. Really no IPAs, or not many IPAs, I should say.
Yeah, it's not something I have a burning desire to do, even though I like drinking them. It's just, I think our owner, President Manny, would prefer I liked IPAs a little bit more, but
sure.
It's okay.
But, tapping into your history, with Goose Island and more, you make some killer barrel-aged beers and also some killer light, drinkable, but characterful lager beers and other light, sessionable styles. We're going to talk about both of those things, both ends of that gravity spectrum right there. Before we do that, G&D Chillers, the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, are proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Want to maximize efficiency in your chiller? G&D's micro-channel condensers are designed for less power draw. Their lighter weight and more compact design uses up to 70% less refrigerant, which means a lower GWP and lower operating costs. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call them to discuss your next project. Also, this episode is brought to you by BSG. Want a natural and economical clarification aid that doesn't impact beer flavor? Then you need Carry Biofine Eco. Developed as a part of Carry's Eco Brewing range, Biofine Eco is a plant-based fining agent that improves beer clarification by instant flocculation of yeast and trub. Available exclusively from BSG. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn more. And is your brewery making its own ciders, seltzers, and other beverages beyond beer? If you need a central source for fruit flavor, Old Orchard has you covered. Old Orchard supplies flavored craft juice concentrate blends to beverage brands for the production of beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, kombucha, and more. Flavor your lineup and streamline your sourcing by heading over to oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Jacob, we normally start the podcast off with a little bit of history. Why don't you tell us ours? What's this kind of career path that you have walked through craft beer that has led you here to, is it head brewer, director of brewing ops? What is your title here at Cruz Blanca?
Head brewer.
Head brewer, cool.
It's a pretty wild one. And none of it was deliberate. So I think that's kind of cool. But it does start straight out of high school. I went to culinary school. I didn't have like a burning desire to be a chef or to cook, but I had to do something. As according to my mother, she's like, you got to do something, right? I didn't think that traditional academic route was for me. I just don't think I have that kind of like rigid discipline. So I said, okay, I think culinary school would be good because I've always been good at like applying ideas and just like hands-on work, right? Where I can see immediate results has always been something I've been really good at. So go to culinary school, 2003, goes pretty well. I start working for a lot of restaurants in Austin. So I back up, I'm from Texas, Austin, Texas. Start working at, banquets, banquet kitchens, hotel restaurants. And then I kind of slowly start moving my culinary career in Austin to more locally driven and kind of like nose to tail, if, farm to table type restaurants. And I think that was like the big aha moment, because then running specials based upon seasonality and things like that, that was really fascinating to me, because then you have to really respect your ingredients and think about them and their versatility. And it's just a really, really mindfulness, really when it came to cooking and food. And I mean, I was 18, 19 years old when I started cooking, and once I became 20 and 21, 22, I mean, I was running like daily specials at restaurants. Before I left Austin, I was the sous chef of a pretty well-known restaurant at the time. It, rest in peace, no longer exists. But, we cooked at the James Beard House, and we were like Food and Wine's top 10 restaurants of 2028 or 27 or something like that. So I just kind of like immediately got propulsed into this world of creativity, right? And my life ran its course in Austin by around when I was 25. I could have stayed there and kept doing what I was doing, and I would have really enjoyed it. But I had an urge to just kind of go out, do something different. A friend of mine who now is back in Austin was living here in Chicago, and they moved in with their partner, so their room became available. So blindly just moved to Chicago, packed up my car, fit as much stuff as I could into it, drove to Chicago. Thankfully, it's the
beauty of the chef life, right? You're pretty much assured that
you'll do anything.
you can get another job as soon as you need it.
That is absolutely correct. That getting a job was never even a concern, because in Chicago, the culinary scene, so this is in 2010, the culinary scene was booming. Like, I mean, it's still booming, but it was in this like really cool scene where you started seeing now chefs that have multiple restaurants and restaurant groups. They were really starting to kind of like come into their own. And that was a really good time there's never not a good time for Chicago food, but I felt like that was a really powerful moment. And they were all in food. So it was actually, I moved into a house of two people, and it was an Austin house. Right, Everybody came in and out of Austin that lived in that house. Moved to Roscoe Village, which is a pretty nice area of Chicago. Rent was $400. We lived on a 2-flat with a backyard. Yeah, really memorable experience. And for $400 a month, and you're 25 years old, yeah, absolutely, you're gonna fucking do it. So it worked out really well. I came here blindly. Within 2 days, I had a job, like you said. I got a job working at this restaurant in Bucktown called the Bristol, which had recently closed. But again, at the time, it was really a cool place. I mean, it continued to be one of the better neighborhood restaurants in Bucktown up until it closed. And again, they were doing a lot of kind of farm to table stuff. I remember, going into the basement, and they had like a full walk-in cooler designated to cured and pickled things. They would buy big during the summer seasons, and they would preserve to get them all through through winter and fall. And I really felt at home at that place because their approach to food was what I had already been doing in Austin.
Sure.
However,
and a lot of fermentation.
Fermentation, man. Side note, before I left Austin and when I moved to Chicago, I was making cheese as kind of like a hobbyist. Went to Vermont, to learn to work on a cheese creamery for a couple of weeks. When I was making cheese in Austin, I was kind of like bootlegging, getting raw milk under the table from farmers and making cheese and then serving it on the cheese plates. And I was making fresh chefs, farmers cheeses, Camembert blues. Yeah, like a lot of really cool stuff. I had like modified a wine cooler and had like little humidity controlled chambers, and it was a really cool thing. But that fermentation, it always is fascinating. And then moved to Chicago, start working at the Bristol. It was a pretty tough job because you worked at the time, Chicago still, I guess the industry norm was still shift pay. So it was $100 a day. So after taxes, $80 a day. And we didn't have any prep cooks in that kitchen, so you owned your station. So either you came in 6 hours before open to prep your station, or if you're sitting pretty, then you could show up 3 hours before open. So it was really tough. I mean, we were easily working 10, 12-hour days almost every day for not a whole lot of money, but I could do it. I had the energy, and I was able. And about 4 months into working at the Bristol, we were doing these we got invited to do a chef collaboration. So, and this was at Goose, at the brew pub at Clybourne. So we came in, and we made beer at Goose, and it was a black IPA. It was called A Beer Named Sue, black IPA, and the usual suspects: Cascade, Chinook, Centennial, Citra. Which 210, kind of cool, I guess. When we look at the trajectory of IPA, it was happening then too.
Oh, the days of black IPA.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back again. Come on. We're now nostalgic for black IPA. Right?
I mean, there's a couple of people that still make incredible black IPAs. And I enjoyed that collaboration so much that the following day, I emailed the head brewer and I was like, look, I'm just in from Chicago, or I'm just in from Texas. Like, I was just drinking Lone Star and Modelo and stuff. I didn't have any sense about beer. Like, I had Dale's Pale Ale, back in Austin, and a couple of, brown ales and stuff like that. And, I got it. I understood it, but I didn't have like a big motivation to make beer or driving force to make beer. But when I was at Goose Island, I really was fascinated with the process. So I started coming in on my days off for a couple of weeks, and already working a ton in kitchens. I don't know. I just had a lot of energy. You're in a new city. Everything is new and fresh. So you just roll with it and you lean into it. So I started working, going in on my days off at Goose, and then a part-time position became available. So I just kind of said, you know what, I'm going to do this, right? Like, I quickly noticed that Goose Island was a part of Chicago. It was an institution. When you walked into that Clybourne Brew Pub, you were a part of history. When did they open? 88? I think in 88. You were a part of history, and I felt like what better way to like really become a part of the city by getting an opportunity to work for an institution. Not only that, that Clybourne Brew Pub, several very talented brewers came in and out of that place. So yeah, I mean, what better opportunity?
Sure.
So, started digging,
if you look
scrubbing
at that
floors,
metaphor,
all that stuff.
I mean, you get to work under some star chefs and tap into their brains. If you get to do the equivalent in the brewing world, as someone who's young and hungry, why wouldn't you jump at that opportunity?
The quality of life immediately improved because I'm not like, I guess we talk about the atrocities in the beer world, and there are a lot of them, but coming from, 12-hour days in the kitchen, not making a whole lot of money, to, a reasonable 8 hours a day at a reasonable time working in breweries, I was like, hey, this is a complete lifestyle change. This is great. Like, I can be a normal human again, right? Not working on the weekends anymore. I have like a very routine schedule.
Not working till midnight.
Yeah, not working till midnight, 2 o'clock sometimes, 2 a.m.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a good change. But then again, like working for Goose, working for an institution, becoming a part of Chicago. I remember looking outside and, it's snowing, and coming from Texas, that's not something we see. And it's snowing outside, and it's November, and you walk into the Goose pub out of the brewery, and that rich mahogany bar is covered. There's, dozens and dozens of people just like shouldered up with their elbows kind of like sinking into that English bar. And I was just like, this is unlike anything I'd ever seen. And I just felt really connected to it. If you have been drinking beer in Chicago for a really long time, that was a very memorable bar. So yeah, I just leaned into it, leaned into Goose, leaned into brewing. I didn't like turn my back on food or anything. I never wanted to be a brewer. I never wanted to cook, but I started cooking, right? And I was pretty good at it. And I never wanted to be a brewer, but I started brewing, and turns out I'm still doing it, 13 years later, and I'm kind of good at it. So, just leaning into the things that presented themselves at the time. Goose, and it just turns out I started working for a really cool brewery, and Goose was a really incredible place because at the time we were, releasing a new beer every week, and these weren't like small batches. We were doing 10 or 20 barrel batches of beer. We were going through a lot of beer. So, 50, new beers a year, and they're Belgians, and they're English bitters, and they're lagers, and they're, IPAs, and so many different kinds, and, oat pale ales on nitro, and, this, you name it. We probably did something really similar, if not the exact same thing at that brew pub. So worked there for about 6 years. And by the time I left, I was already the head brewer there. So I was either just kind of continue grinding it out at the pub, or go to Goose Island production facility. And when you go from pub to production, a lot of things change. And I wasn't really sure I was ready to make that leap. And then Cruz Blanca came to me. It was Manny and Rick. At the time, they were looking for a brewer. My name came up a lot because I had the culinary background, and then I was already making beer.
You say Rick.
Yeah, Rick Bayless for Frontera. And it just so happened that, Frontera opened around the same time Goose did in the 80s, and their kind of trajectory and kind of came up together. So Frontera, is just as equally a part of Chicago as Goose Island has been in the for food to beer. Who did Frontera and Rick and Manny go to when they needed a brewer? They went to John Hall.
Sure.
Turns out John Hall knew a guy, and that was me. They were talking about me before I even knew it. So they had come to me a couple of years before opening, and I hadn't quite hit my ceiling yet at Goose, so I said no. A couple of years later, they came back, and then I was like, you know what? I think I'm ready, because I think I've kind of not necessarily exhausted Goose, but I got to that point to where I think I was ready, Sure. So we opened up Cruz in 2016, and 4 or 5, 7 years later, 7 years later of Cruz, I think we're just hitting this point. We haven't even tipped yet in terms of, the tipping point of, once that domino falls, the stars align and you're really moving. I don't think we've even hit that point yet. And every year it's a new level of growth. I can't say we've taken a very typical trajectory, but we're very much alive, and we're working every day on it.
Well, that's what makes the story interesting. You've got the pub system downstairs here, in the what is the neighborhood that we're in now? Is this
West Loop?
Yeah. And so you are making beer here. You also, make some beer on a larger scale, using some partners or a partner here. Now the story this year is going to get even crazier as you're branching out beyond that, launching a strategic partnership, I think even in Texas to make more lager for the Texas market, bringing you back.
Bringing me back to Texas.
It all kind of goes back there to Texas.
It's kind of wild how that works out.
Life is funny that way. Well, I want to talk about your approach to designing beers, building a beer program, and then some of the specific and technical ways that you make sessionable beers, but also pull on your culinary background for that. Before we do that, ProBrew is excited to announce that they are currently featuring short lead times between 2 and 4 weeks for their in-stock ProFill rotary can fillers. These can fillers run at speeds between 100 and 600 plus cans per minute while achieving precise and consistent filling volumes not achievable by most inline and mobile fillers. For more information, fill out their contact form on www.probrew.com or email contactus@probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, you like wildly aromatic IPAs and tropical lagers? Good thing Omega designed thiolized yeast for just that reason. Thiolized yeast are a new tool for brewers to bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. And wait, there's more. Omega yeast makes a yeast to order with a consistent 1-week lead time, ensuring peak freshness and reliability. We are here in Chicago in the home of Omega yeast.
I can confirm all those things are true about Omega.
Great folks over there. Great folks.
As it's funny, when at Goose, we were very, you get attached to your suppliers and you can't really use anyone else after a while. And at Goose, we were Y yeast and with the occasional White Labs, and I'd always wanted to use Omega, so I could kind of reset with opening in Cruz, and it was nice to start using Omega.
What a beautiful place they have there, and it is pristine and gorgeous, and they're making some stuff, and we appreciate their support here. But let's talk about the beer program for Cruz Blanca. So you get tapped by Manny and Rick to run a beer program, and you have some ideas about what those beers are going to be. IPA is not your jam, but building flavorful beers absolutely is. So, how did you start going about formulating a beer program for Cruz Blanca?
Our core, I will say, is very deliberate. That is more Manny-driven. Manny's our owner, who's very much a part of the whole entire thing. Like he's not the, like the brewer owner that kind of like sits in the office. He is on the ground floor.
He's not the absentee CEO,
he is in the trenches with all of us. And his job looks very different. He's not in the brewery, like graining out, but he is making deals for the longevity of the brewery. So he's very active. Rick is no longer part of the project. Manny and Rick were business partners for a really long time. So that was kind of like when we opened up this physical location, it's pretty large. Manny said, "Hey, if I can have my brewery, Rick, you can have your other side of the building for Lenya." And now we kind of operate a little bit more in tandem with each other. But yeah, that was the reason why there's two things underneath this roof. But anyway, that relationship ran its course. Rick's no longer on the project. It's Manny is, taking over. There's a lot of deliberateness with the core portfolio and all that kind of stuff. And those come from, conversations that we all have. I'm not kind of like tooting my own horn, but when I look at what Cruz accomplishes, it's kind of exhausting, because underneath this roof, so many things go unnoticed because there's so many different things happening. And there are beers that, like my romance beers, and those are, Sugar Creek, and those are things that, coming out of, of the earth beers, we get a lot of stuff from Caleb over there in Indiana.
The Sugar Creek Malt.
Yeah, Sugar Creek Malt. Yeah. We had that red corn lager right up a couple of months ago. And
that's true. If you're a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, I think that was it David Nielsen who wrote that story on corn. For Craft Beer and Brewing with corn, and we have a recipe from Cruz Blanca, I believe, alongside that story. But everyone who's a subscriber already knows that, right? Because they get the magazine. Yeah.
So there's beers like that, and there's beers that when we can go to Caleb's. I can go to Caleb's, and I can see in front of me how everything is done, and I can see his crop, and I can see his smokehouse, and and we have smoked beers on, and you built like a really strong connection, romantic connection to that. The corn grisette, 100% malted corn grisette. Who does that, right? We do, because I wanted to take something that was close to me in multiple ways and manipulate it into something that gives it respect and justice. And that is like a core value of food to when you're cooking at a certain level or high level is like respecting your ingredients. And I think that translated onto a lot of the kind of beers that we do. Smoke Alley, that was like a beer that is inspired by a certain little neighborhood in Oaxaca, but it is very much kind of German pivo, Polish Grodzicki type thing. It's like a mashup of a lot of different things. And you know what? Caleb goes and he gets that white oak, and he's lives in Indiana, but he'll drive up to Wisconsin to forage it because there's this particular place that he likes, getting it from, and then he'll smoke it in his like modified homemade smoker, at 500, 1,000 pounds at a time. So there's
smoking
a really
wheat too to make it to make it groats.
So there's a lot of so you start building this really personal connection, and there's a lot of beers that we do that are just like that, where there's a story, there's a reason, there's a purpose. And, mixed culture beers, there are a lot of fruit re-fermentations with local stuff. But then you have this completely other side of what we do, which is like Mexico Calling. That's our bread and butter. It's just a riff. It's my interpretation of like a full-bodied Mexican lager, not a light lager. It's of like a real richer lager, despite being under, 5%. And then we've got, hazy IPA and Chelada, which we came out with this year, which is lime and salt lager, which isn't revolutionary, but it can be done so many different ways. So there's this, and so then there's more of like this commodity kind of aspect to it. And I have to respect that too, because those are the beers that I grew up drinking and still drink. And then in the middle, you start seeing all these weird, the barrel age program, which is, again, like being a part of Goose Island, Bourbon County was just like mind blowing. So, I got good at an appreciation for barrel aging. And now our barrel age program is wild. It's crazy that we do a lot of really pretty bizarre things. And then, I don't know, nobody said, Manny didn't say, hey, do all of these things. It's just something I was given autonomy over to build the program. And so that's why we do so many different things, is because I have an appreciation for all of them. And I might not do them incredibly well to perfection, but I think that I can do a pretty good job at all of it. And that's our strength and our weakness, because you can go to Dovetail and they live, eat and breathe lager and, Weiss beer, or then you can go to Hot Butcher. I live in Ravenswood, so, familiar with that area. You can go to Hot Butcher. Bread and butter is IPA, man. Like Jude, they do a great job over there. And you come to Cruz and we're just kind of all over the place. That's okay.
Yeah, but there's a story here, and I think that that's interesting to trace those connections as we, hear about your, culinary history, and you're making beers in much the same way, trying to, walk back to that farm and follow it through the process, and some of those beers, but at the same time also making everyday beers that are flavorful and fun to drink. We should also say, like, Cruz Blanca, it is a brew pub here. There is a full restaurant. Sure. The culinary side is fantastic. And so you have some of those resources to pull on, and you are also designing beer here that will complement food, just by the sheer nature of it. But it's interesting to see how these pockets kind of fit into your own history and interests, and that you've carried those, along the way.
Yeah, because with cooking, I was, lucky enough to work for places. Well, I don't know. There's two different ways to look at it. There's luck, and then there's just working hard to get into the kind of places you want to be. A lot of people have said, "Oh, you got lucky with this, this, and that." And there is a sheer stroke of fortune with a lot of these things. But I mean, like, I had to want to go to Goose Island. I could have stayed at the Bristol and cooked, but I inserted myself into that brewery until I was a part of it, and I did that into kitchens because, there's an eagerness eagerness, it can kind of be a little overwhelming at times, but there's a sheer want and willingness.
Sure, you had the hunger.
You had the hunger, yeah, you're right. And I still do have hunger. It just looks a little different these days, but yeah, again, going back to that respect of ingredients and how does it want to be treated and manipulated. And again, like with Cruz, there's this romance side with a lot of the stuff that we do that is very unique to my personality. And then there's things that are more brand specific, like, you know, Mexico Calling and our core and stuff like that. So you kind of get it all underneath one roof, and it's challenging to have to play that spectrum, but I'm happy that, and I'm really glad that I have the space to do the things that I want to do, because a lot of brewers don't have that.
Sure. Well, I want to dig into some specifics and some details around that, because you throw out something like 100% corn grisette, and you know, and that's something unique. We have never on this podcast talked about a 100% corn beer. You know, and since that clearly that ingredient has some special connection for you, I want to talk about not just, you know, the why, but also how you employ that and how you can actually make a beer that way. Before we do that, brewers, are you looking for the best beer, mead, and cider recipes on the planet? Join the American Homebrewers Association to unlock the 2023 National Homebrew Competition medal-winning recipes. American Homebrewers Association members have access to nearly 1,400 trusted and tested recipes, plus a Zymergy magazine subscription, exclusive discounts, live webinars, instruction videos, and more. Plus, sign up for a membership by December 31st, 2023, and select a free brewing book, a $25 value. Learn more at homebrewersassociation.org/CBBpod. Also, building a brewery requires coordination, equipment, supplies, funding, and more. It's enough to overwhelm any savvy brewer. Lotus Beverage Alliance simplifies the process, offering all of the elements for your business in one place. Need an ally for your brewing venture? Their team of engineers, brewery consultants, and financial advisors are here to help. With Lotus on your side, you can focus on what you do best, bring exceptional beverages. Lotus Beverage Alliance, www.lotusbevalliance.com. All right, Jacob, let's talk about 100% corn grisette. That just strikes me as weird and difficult.
Sure.
So walk me through it. Why make it? And then what did it take to actually make a beer with 100% corn that's going to ferment in the way that you'd like it and make, you know, and then, you know, how did you step through each of the processes from, you know, initial ingredients, you know, through choosing yeast and, you know, and making this, the beer actually turn out the way that someone would expect from a beer called a grisette?
This is a total oxymoron, but like, I think that an approach to cooking, fermentation is, it's minimal intervention at times, and it's very technical at the same time. It's knowing when to start and stop, and when to push the gas and when to push the gas, and when to, you know, lean on the brake a little bit. And that's always been my approach towards beer and food. And this was one of those kinds of beers where, you know, Caleb is like, hey, I'm malting corn. This was 5 years ago, probably. And all right, well, I work for a Mexican brewery per se, or, you know, or an idea of a Mexican brewery. Corn, that would be the expectation, right? Funny that we don't even use corn in our lagers, but we use corn in other things. So
only in the expensive beers.
Yeah, only in the expensive beers, which is hilarious. So he's like, hey, I got this white corn. Do you want it? Yeah, I'll take it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'll take it. And I was like, I kind of want to do something wild and really showcase the corn, because going back to the food, like you have an ingredient and you want to put it on a pedestal. So I'm taking all this white corn and I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do with it? And then Caleb's like, well, the extract is super low, and you know, we can't mill it like barley. It has to be really coarsely crushed, and at 100%, if you mill it too fine, you'll get stuck. So I needed a coarse crush. The extract's going to be pretty low on it. Bunch of rice hulls, but brewed it because it's malted just with the normal brewing mash regime, whatever. And
just single infusion mash.
Yeah, single infusion. Again,
imagine a low temperature to try to just make everything fermentable.
Well, that's
I have no idea how corn.
Well, it's good that you say that, because then that in lies where the style came from, or the inspiration for the grisette is because unsure of its extract,
right?
Don't know how it's going to perform in the brew house, but the things that I do have control over is drying it out to absolute zero. If I would have used a lager yeast or an ale yeast and my extract is low, those first batches, I don't know if I could have done all the math in the world and wouldn't have known because it's uncharted territory. So I could have planned to do a 5% lager all corn, but I didn't know what it was going to behave like in the brew house. So I was like, best bet, even if your extract is shit and you get an 8 Plato beer off of using like 900 pounds of corn for a 10-barrel batch, as long as you dry it out, it's still going to have alcohol in it, right? Like you're going to get to something that's not, you're going to get somewhere versus, brewing like a 1.5% lager and being super disappointed by that. At least I could get, 4% or no, the preliminary batches were very, less figured out than they are now. But
so you have two options then to drive in. That's either a diastaticus saison yeast that's going to push, and get to dry, or Brettanomyces that over time will also get you to that dryness. So then I guess the ingredient
when you use
determines the beer that you're going to make that way.
So when you use both of those, a diastatic yeast, which is in this, and Brett, the thing is, it's like negative Plato. It is about as dry as you can get. So then I can ensure that I'm going to get some reasonable level of alcohol versus using like a less attenuating lager yeast, ale yeast, whatever, So then I'm like, okay, I can use these things, really dry that thing out. And we're already talking about a 4% beer, maybe under 4. All right, now when we're
what was the extract percentage on this? Do you remember?
Those first batches were like at 50, and now I'm up towards like 65, which Caleb will say it's sitting at north of 70, but that's with a very particular kind of crush and a very particular type of mash procedure with single infusion. I mean, if you have to crush it coarsely. So the extract's a little bit different.
You're a stout brewer too. Like you're used to low efficiencies.
Funny because our stouts still, our 12% stouts, 13% stouts still finish at like 8 Plato. So they're well fermented.
But you're used to inefficient mashes.
Correct.
That,
absolutely.
Using first runnings and not sparging and all those fun things to push that drive your efficiency way down. You can work your head around it. You're just using a lot of grain without getting much out of it.
I mean, and to that point, so then, I mean, like get as much as I can out of this and then just ferment it to nothing. So that's, the choice of yeasts. So then, you're using super dry saison yeast, using Brett. So then I'm like, what better way to capture corn and you really bring it all together, at its heart, culture, harness bacterial culture off the corn and use it in the beer, very much like you would a traditional Berliner or something. And that again goes into just like wanting to put the corn on the pedestal. So culture, isolate bacterial culture off the corn for acidifying the beer, and that's just through multiple step ups from enough to something that I can get a good pitch with. And then it's all just like a co-pitch.
Did you any test with this culture to make sure that it was actually gonna ferment? And
we ran a couple little tests. And then, just through multiple flask generations, you just kind of start to isolate what's working and what's not, just through temperature and nutrition and hops, no hops, blah, 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 all those things. So I was able to get something that was producing favorable character. So pitch that with
it's like a wine-like fermentation. Where it's wine with yeast off of the grape skins.
Correct. Yeah.
Except now you're using corn and a corn-derived culture here. Okay, that's fun. That's wild.
Yeah, it's at the heart of it. That's like something that comes kind of from food, where nothing is wasted, right? Like you use every bone and every piece of skin and in certain kinds of cooking. So essentially, if you can kind of attack these flavors from multiple angles, showcasing different things, and you get something that's uniquely its own. So that's, where corn grisette comes from.
Crazy amount of prep work, however, for this to be able to culture, fermenting bacteria culture off of off of corn,
Yeah.
run it through multiple generations, make sure that it's going to give you flavors that you want and produce an acidity and be able to operate in an alcoholic environment, which not all of these natural yeast really are. And going through that process to set it all up so that you can make this kind of one project here using this malt from Sugar Creek.
That goes back to that statement of like this almost oxymoron of like minimal intervention, but also very well thought out. So it's like all I can do is kind of line everything up, and then once it's in there, and it's going to behave how it behaves. But if I can put everything into place in a thoughtful way, then hopefully we cross our fingers, and that's when we step back. Yeah. So, and that's what happens with this beer. So yeah, it's a very, it's a good way to showcase the corn, because it has such a unique flavor, but it's beer. If, depending on what day you drink it, I think it kind of changes. Sometimes I get a lot of corn. Sometimes it just tastes like a nice dainty little, barley saison. So it's
sure.
And then, with the style, it's bottle conditioned. There's a Brett character in it, but it's super soft. There's a nice tang acidity from the corn bacteria. So yeah, it's full corn, but it doesn't taste like our idea of corn.
Sure.
It's really cool.
So now if I'm tracking back, because it's a diastaticus and Brett beer, you probably didn't mash it as low because you want to give that bacteria something to work on over time. You don't want it to fully ferment before the bacteria can produce acidity.
It was a pretty normal mash, like 150, 152. It wasn't super low. And it's pretty wild because this corn, it has texture and it has body and it has, it supports a head. Despite its acidity, it supports a little bit. It's quickly fading, but it does have that, and it has body and a texture for a 4% beer. It almost has more texture than it feels all barley.
Do you know the kind of protein content or oil content? Because I know that that could certainly with corn. Any higher oil is absolutely going to work against your foam retention. But
no, I don't, and I don't need to know, because again, this is one of those beers that it's like, I kind of want to be hands off, a little bit, and let it do what it needs to do. And had it had terrible head retention or terrible foam or negative foam, then so be it. But that's that's what you get when you're doing something like this. You just have to figure it out. And so we've done it for 5 years now, and I've pretty much kind of have it dialed in. As Caleb has the malting of the corn kind of dialed in, so do I have the procedure dialed in. But it took a long time to get there. Those first batches, started, half barrel, couple of half barrels, and then, moved up to doing smaller, 5 barrel, not totally 5, but some smaller runs, and now, 10 and 20 barrel batches. So it took a while to really get to this point, but it's just something that's really cool and unique to its own. Yeah.
So this has a pretty deep golden color. I imagine there's a relatively long boil then on this. So what's driving the color?
1 hour boil.
Really?
It's white corn. I mean, again, we walk into this with the assumption that it's going to be a particular way because we all know what corn tastes like.
Sure.
But it's just not. And I didn't have any expectations of what it was supposed to be. Again, it's just like, if you just kind of set things up and you just knock them down and you step away from it, and where do they say, like, where the chips lay, how the cards fall or whatever. You just kind of have to turn your back on it and see what happens with it. And it turned into something that's uniquely its own. And again, bottle conditioned, and it's just like a pretty beer, and it's alive,
Yeah. Were there any quirks to the fermentation? So you're going to then blend a saison strain, a diastaticus strain with the kind of acid producing culture. How'd you go about doing that? And, was there anything else to this fermentation that was interesting?
No, it was kind of business as usual. There was a really healthy, corn lactic bacteria prop and pitch. Generally with stuff like this,
you weren't trying to strain it and
sort of. Okay. Usually with beers like this and with the mixed culture stuff, a pretty gross underpitch of any sort of sack, and a little bit heavier on the Brett pitch. And then if it's a mixed culture where I just don't really know what I'm pitching, I just kind of control that with IBUs. But this was deliberately kind of stressed out because I did want to let the bacteria the corn bacteria really make a presence. So yeah, like a nice underpitch of the Saccharomyces Saison strain, and then the Brett's just gonna do what it does. So it spins about 3 months in stainless until it reaches this point to where I'm happy to package, and as it ages out in the bottle, it becomes a little more acidic. But it's a slow process. It's not like this super dynamic oak aged, Saison or anything. It's all stainless, but it's a very clean execution of the corn. But yeah, you just kind of have to let everything do what it needs to do.
Sure. Are there any specific? Are you public with the yeasts that you use this?
French Saison, Omega.
Oh, there you go.
Omega French Saison. I love French Saison. I think that it is incredibly versatile, despite conventional thinking. Been able to make really heavily fruited beers with French Saison that don't even taste like Saison, depending on, and it's all about how you ferment it. Free rises. I oftentimes in the past have used it against Omega's recommendations, and ramped it up to 104. And I find that the hotter it ferments, the more neutral it becomes, especially with this French Saison. And if I kind of hold it back at 80, it gets a lot more estery. So
you're the second person who has told me that in the last 3 weeks.
Oh,
right
wow.
now.
Yeah.
No, Jeremy from Protagonist was stating the same thing, that with a French Saison yeast, he's absolutely pushing the temperatures and letting them rise because it actually becomes more neutral at that higher temperature. That's a little bit. It seems counterintuitive on some level, but
yeah, and that's a sheer observation of mine after you just using it so many times for so many different things, and that's cool because I've always felt that way, and a lot of people don't necessarily believe in that. And Omega, when I told Lance and Laura at Omega that I'm fermenting it at 105, she's like, "You're not supposed to do that," but. Okay,
breaking the law.
So yeah, the yeast in itself,
right?
French Saison, and then the Brett pitches is it's from oak. It's from, and at this point in time, our kind of mixed culture oak stuff it's collabs, it's bottles, it's fruit, it's a lot of different stuff. So that's a little slurry pitch in there as well.
Sure. Well, that's really cool. So then IBUs are pretty low on this.
Probably 8 ish.
just enough to dial the acidity, and the acidity it's nice. It has that kind of fruity lemon lime citrus character to it, but it's also not overdone.
Yeah, and that's kind of it. For a grisette, actually, it is leaning on the acidic side for grisette, but I just didn't know what else to call it, and that a lot of the beers that we do, I don't know what to call because they're more flavor driven, and we want to put things in nice little tight categories, and I don't, I didn't have anywhere else to put it. So I felt like grisette, it's in the style of grisette because it's really kind of table beer, low strength. It's inspired by, but yeah, it's got a little more acidity than some grisettes, but that's just how we got there.
But yes, and blind judging, judges don't know how to handle it. Yeah. It doesn't, this is a beer that needs more of a story than it needs, style guidelines, to define it. But that's really interesting and really fascinating.
Yeah.
Anything else to brewing 100% corn beer? What a strange and wonderful process.
Yeah. So that opened up the door to working with corn. And corn, I guess, again, people have this expectation that, Mexican brewery, we need to be using corn. And, so we did, but I didn't give it to you in that way that we all were expecting. Sure. corn is such a sacred thing to Mexico. It is the pillar and the foundation of existence, and it is used, and is consumed multiple times a day, and it is very important to Mexico. And the last thing that I think, after like a lot of research and things, like the last thing that Mexico would have wanted to have done with corn is put it into a beer, and that was basically a beverage that was brought via colonialization, forceful to Mexico. It was reserved for food, but the expectation is always that corn is used in Mexican beer. And well, okay, then I'm going to give it to you in a much more articulate way. It's a long story to tell, but we get to stuff like this. So then, we're not bringing corn in from Mexico. We're using what's around us, which is very in the spirit of food, and even, in beer, and, Bavarian brewers have their selection of yeasts and of raw ingredients and hops, and that's what specifically makes those kinds of beers, and
generally grown within several hours of where they are. Yes.
Yeah. So this is like my attempt at that, but that is very still in the heart of food and in the heart of production of beer. So again, it's like very, very well and thought out and technical, but at a certain point, you just have to stand away from it.
Sure. Does corn find its way into any other beers that you make?
So we did that red corn lager that we haven't actually brewed it in about a year or so, but I should get it on the schedule soon because it's 70% red corn. It's Bloody Butcher red corn, which is an American red corn. Yeah. Caleb grows that. So I do it at 70% red corn, and there's a little rye and a little bit of malted barley in it. Again, Caleb has that. And it is this delightful kind of like light crimson, kind of peachy color, I think. And through fermentation, the pigment changes its color a little bit. But again, that's another one of those beers that it's a very unique flavor to it. And then when I say it's 70% red corn, people's kind of their mind kind of like is a little confused, right? Because again, we have this idea of what corn should be, and it's just not. And that Bloody Butcher red corn has a very kind of like spicy, peppery black pepper character to it. And you don't really know it until you use it at such a high percentage.
Yeah.
And there's a distiller, I don't think he's currently with them, but I had this conversation with him a couple of years ago at this distillery called Judson & Moore here in Chicago. And he tried the red corn lager at some event, and he's like, this is really fascinating because we just brewed like 100% Bloody Butcher red corn distillate, and it has that same like black pepper, kind of like black pepper. It's not like ashy, as in like, tobacco ash or wood ash, but it kind of has that like mineral kind of character to it. And he was able to kind of pick it out. And unless you use this stuff at such a high percentage, you don't really get a real understanding of it. So that's why everything's used at such high percentages.
Brewing a 70% red corn lager seems like you're biting off a nice technical problem to solve.
It's the same thing where the mash is terrible. That in that lager, I do use enzymes. I will beta glucanase and a little bit of amylase, not amylase, alpha amylase enzyme to just kind of help initiate a little bit of conversion, because there I do want a little bit more extract out of it, and there's still enough 2-row to kind of help fill things out. But yeah, that presents its problem too. And then learning what I learned from the corn grisette with what the brew house is capable of, despite its analytical data. I figured, I can do that and make a 5% lager. It's going to be hard. And again, like for a 5% lager on a 10-barrel batch, we're mashing like almost 900 pounds of corn and 2-row, and it's, the extract is terrible, and it's a really tough day, and the runoff is terrible. But I mean, you just do it. I don't know what else to say,
makes an interesting beer,
Yeah.
and it makes something that no one else is out there making. Because why on earth would anyone else make an 80% bloody or 70% red corn beer or red corn lager?
I kind of want to do my next. Well, I've had this on my mind for a long time, but bring a smoke character into it some way, somehow. And that might be having Caleb smoke the corn. Maybe, what happens when you smoke the malted corn and instead of using wood, you could use like the cobs of the corn. Who knows? But there's like this, I always try to do things with intent. But yeah, the next corn beer, he's got this like really crazy purple Peruvian corn that I've kind of thought about off and on. And then, but yeah, like something smoked in corn kind of like feels like a very savory beer. So we'll get there.
Smoked corn beer. Yeah. Sign me up for that. That sounds fascinating. And also a beer that I've never had before. I've had a lot of beers over the years. Never had a smoked corn beer. Nonetheless, let's shift beers. And this is fascinating. I've never found anyone who has gone as deep into corn as you. But I also want to kind of tap into some of that Goose Island background, that experience, and talk about stout brewing. Some of your stouts have really connected well with our blind judges. They've connected out there in the broader beer world. And and it's fun to watch you bring this kind of stout background into Cruz Blanca to complement all the other stuff, these lighter food friendly beers. These barrel aged stouts that you make are not necessarily the same kind of food friendly, but they're that beautiful dessert course that helps finish that meal. Talk to me about how you then have gone about differentiating the barrel aged beers, the barrel aged stouts, and high gravity beers that you make.
Again, that has a story that I feel that is a little romantic and important to me. Last weekend was our Luchador release, and we released, we make 7 different barrel-aged beers, and, some of them are stouts, some of them are kind of more paler beers, some of them are fruited. But anyway, stout's just been on the brain, and I'm all stouted out. But stout is...
Get ready, because you're tomorrow is Fobab judging, and then it's Fobab festival time.
Yeah, and we just released
hanging at the Lager Lounge during Fobab.
We just released a stout today, and it's kind of silly. It's chocolate churro coffee stout, but it is very much a coffee stout, and it is very authentically made, and it's super good. Still kind of dry for an 8.5% stout. It's dry. But anyway, stouts, cool story. It goes back to Goose, and it goes back to at that old Clybourne brew house. It's, it's November, it's snowing. Sometimes it's snowing, and you're mashing in this big stout, and then you're watching it boil in the brew kettle, and you're just like this witch over a cauldron, right? And not ever experiencing anything like that. You build a relationship with it of nostalgia, and then having Bourbon County for the first time, and we weren't brewing that at Clybourne, but it was very much a part of Goose culture, and trying that. And then again, come November, late November, December, when we were tapping it at Goose Island at the pub, there was hundreds of people in that place just drink that beer, so you felt really connected to it. And then we did go on to brew a lot of our own pub stuff at Goose,
the ritual of it.
Yeah, the ritual
of
it.
Yearly seasonal ritual.
We were releasing 750s of it. Sometimes at Fobab they were taking awards, and Bourbon County wasn't. Out of the pub, when it was kind of this point of kind of not contention, but it was a nice little back and forth.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, it was always fun. But yeah, so you start building a relationship with stout. I don't particularly love drinking barrel-aged stout, but I like making it, because it's very technique intensive. So yeah, an appreciation for the stout. Cruz with our barrel-aged stouts, they kind of follow that same suit of the stuff that we're doing at Goose, but I think they're a little bit more adjusted for modern palate. They don't lean too far into the sweetness. They still finish under 10, but they have a lot of texture. And I like a lot of roast in stouts. just like the real. Remember those like Russian Imperial stouts that I haven't even heard that term Russian Imperial Stout in years, right?
Well, this is probably not a time to attach the Russian to the front of that.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Given current geopolitical...
Sure, but even despite that, I mean, at some point in time, that style kind of fell off in favor for just this much more sweeter, softer stout.
Barrel-aged pastry kind of approach.
And this raisin and pruny and espresso and toffee kind of Russian Imperial Stout, or what I remember it being, is just kind of been left. It's been left for this chocolatey, kind of more softer sweet stout because it responds well to barrel aging. So I always kind of wanted to preserve a little bit of that with these stouts, and they are very roasty. Like I use a ton of crystal and a ton of chocolate and a ton of black malt, and up to the point to where it's like, again, it's against recommendations, but through the long aging, it's all those sharp edges soften a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of, I've stuck with that because those were my first memories of stout, which was like, man, this is roasty and has like some really rich, sun-dried fruit character to it, pruny and figgy and stuff like that. So I try to keep that alive with the stouts.
That's interesting. And it's something, I mean, it's a conversation that we just had last month at our Best in Beer tasting with Stan Hieronymus and Kate Bernat and Joe Stang, Patrick Dawson and me, and trying to, there were some of these, kind of throwback approach. Maybe what I hear you saying is actually interesting because it is both modern and echoes back to that kind of classic approach. That focusing, something like Bourbon County has that classic approach, but it also maybe doesn't have the same kind of body and textural approach. And what you're trying to capture is this modern approach to this silky texture, but with a controlled sweetness, but also with these kinds of big and bold, both fermentation flavors and significant roast malt character that can all work together, and it's something that we talk about all the time, that there's no such thing as too sweet. There is such thing as unbalanced.
Sure.
And, and as long as that sweetness is balanced and you are balancing some of that body and sweetness with some of these, with this roast character, then that can work. And that fits your preference and what you want to put out. It's not that every brewer has to do that, but this is your approach and you think that there's something to that. Yeah.
I want my stout to kind of like fight me back a little bit. Like it should be fulfilling, but it should also have a level of warmth to it. And I want to feel it when I drink it. So that roast is necessary. And I think there was a time recently where we just kind of like we got a little bit away from that, and you can always like add a lot of like malt extract, and you can add a lot of things and a lot of just straight up de-bitter black malts to kind of get that sweet, but there's just so much in the mid palate of that consumption that you miss when you do stuff like that. So again, like there is balance in stout, and I really like that. But then sometimes I want to lean a little bit into the unbalanced, and I want that heavy roast. Again, I want to feel my stout. Like I want to, I say fight me back a little bit, but like I want that,
Cool. So you're designing a stout recipe that's going to go into barrels and it's going to sit for, 12 or 18 or 24 months or, whatever that takes within a whiskey or bourbon barrel. How do you then build out a recipe? What does the recipe look like? What are some of the malts that you layer in there to build it out?
So Ray Gordo is like, that's just our barrel aged stout, but we use the same stout base for all of the, adjuncted variants and stuff like that. The stout recipe is, let me think.
So probably a big chunk of 2-row,
there's 2-row. You know what? It changes a little bit every year because here's the thing. I only do maybe like 4 brews of it every year for barrel aging. And every year the knobs are getting turned in a little bit of a different way. So some years I'm trying to, last year, I had a little bit weak fermentation. So I'm trying things to get better fermentation of it. But then it dries out a little bit more. Sometimes it dries out to where I want it. Sometimes it dries out a little bit more. We'll blend all of the stout batches that we do in that year and then barrel age it. Some batches have a little bit more crystal. Some batches have less crystal. Like last year, I backed all the crystal off that recipe by about 25%. So I think like the stuff that we had sent for the magazine, the Ray Gordo from 2021 or something like that, that was like the full crystal amount that we normally use. This year, backed off about 25%, and it made like a pretty noticeable difference.
Huh.
And not in a bad way, not in a good way. It was just different. But I'm always kind of trying to turn the needle a little bit just to kind of to find the right mix. But it makes it hard because in addition to also adjusting the recipe, fermentation is equally as important in stout brewing, and especially with barrel-aged stout brewing, that you can take it a little too far and you're left with something that's a little too dry. So it's been hard to really kind of nail it down. Like I always say this, like I think I kind of have the sweet spot, but when you're only brewing it once a year, it makes it really hard to dial in, right?
Got to take good notes.
Yeah, take great notes. I have just like a fat binder of just all the stout brews of the year, so I can always go back from day one to the first stout brew to where we are today. But yeah, there's 2-row. What it doesn't have that I might start putting in it is Munich. Just a little, maybe backing off the 2-row a little bit, filling the kind of center, filling the real center of that recipe with a little bit of Munich, maybe to help soften the roast, but still have the roast. Because I think the recipe right now is it's 2-row. Let's see, 120. There's C20. Excuse me, not C20. C60, 120, and there's a lot of both of that. There's
what do you think? What's a lot in a general term? Like,
I think 7%. 120, 7%. C60, 7% Carafa 2, 7% black malt, 10% roasted barley. Yeah, there's a lot of. It's when you start stacking all that stuff up, it makes up a large sum of the roasted malt, and that was just that year. So there may be little differences from year to year. But yeah, I mean,
these are pretty hefty percentages.
Yeah, they're hefty percentages for sure. And then it makes it challenging because then if you dry it out a little bit, so I'm always like concerned about fermentation. There's been a couple of years that I may have underpitched, or maybe it's underpitching or not adequate aeration, finishes a little short. So that never really helps. So then next year I'm like, oh, I want a much stronger fermentation. But then a 28 Plato beer dries out below 10, you're still left with richness and fullness, but it's not, sometimes it can kind of fall a little flat for barrel aging. So basically the target is always moving. It's not like Bourbon County is like those guys, they brew a lot of it and they kind of have it dialed in, but it still took them they're still probably making changes to that recipe. Everybody makes changes to the recipes, or at least I would like to think with stuff like this. So I do know that last year I kind of wanted something a little drier. So we got that this year and it turned out really well, but it's just ever so slightly different. But yeah. And then with the brewing it's pretty typical procedure where you just I take the recipe, I can't fit it all in the mash tun, so splitting the recipe by half, mashing in, taking all the strong wort, boiling.
You're doing an identical,
multiple
grain bill in each of the halves.
Yeah. Okay. In the halves, take all the strong wort, start boiling it, and
no sparge then, or minimal.
So small, I might sparge for 10 barrels, but I'm also halving that for 5 barrels. I might sparge with like a barrel or something.
Right.
So not a whole lot. And then I'll start boiling that, and I'm like lautering into the boiling. I'm lautering the second batch into the boiling wort. So it's just always kind of like just constantly going and going and going and going. It's pretty good boil. So I guess that first half, even though it's half of a 10 barrel, I'll lauter to about 7 or 8 barrels because I'm going to be boiling it for such a long time.
Yeah.
So by the time I, take the lauter, get mashed in for another batch on a single infusion 10 barrel, I've already been boiling for hour and a half, 2 hours. So I'm already getting some really good evaporation. So then I start lautering into wort that's already boiling, and the lauter is pretty slow, so it never stops boiling.
Right.
So I'm just lautering onto boiling wort, and then it'll boil for another like 2 or 3 hours to hit those gravities. So, I mean, it's just all boil.
Sure. Yeah. That is not as long as some other folks are boiling. Obviously,
we've 12-hour boils.
You got 30-hour boils. With 3 mashes. Happening out there in the world to go.
Not for me.
To go into that like incredibly thick, inky, reduced kind of stout approach. But body isn't also like just sweetness. There's other characters to it to build that. And if it's just sweetness, then that's not exactly the level of depth that you're looking for.
Right. And I mean, there's a pretty good amount of oats in there. I think, taking all that strong, the first wort, I think you're preserving a lot of that. I think just by design and just by the recipe itself with all that crystal, and the body is kind of just like the byproduct of what the flavor I'm trying to achieve is, but the body is always going to be there because it's what happens when you brew, a 12, 13% stout and you only take the first runnings and you boil for such a long time. So maybe the body is always kind of tweaked with fermentation. Basically, I think because it's always going to be there with a beer that's that high in gravity. But I think I can move the needle a little bit on fermentation and trying to not have it finish out as much or finish out more, depending on what I'm kind of into that year. And then I might brew oftentimes multiple batches. I might do a little bit of different stuff with each batch just to kind of see, just to humor myself, right?
Sure.
That's why
you always blend in the end.
Yeah, because it all gets blended, and then it all gets put in barrels. So I can do that, which is nice. So one batch might be a little sweeter, or one batch might be a little bit heavier on the roast. Maybe I'll down a couple of things, but it's just kind of funny because after 6 years of brewing it, I still don't have something that like completely works that I can just like press go blindly. I think I'm almost there, but
still tweaking the parameters.
Still tweaking it, yeah. And I think personal tastes change, industry changes. So I remember deliberately last year saying I want this to dry out a little bit more because I'm hoping that the industry will start appreciating that drier stout, because I remember like Fremont Brewing several years ago. Was it like Dark Star?
Yep.
Man, those stouts were absolutely incredibly balanced and insanely good. And they weren't terribly sweet. I mean, they were fairly dry for the time, and they were like had some good, structure and bitterness to them. So I'm like crossing my fingers that maybe the world will start appreciating that a little bit more. And to a certain extent, there's a lot of people who do that. There's breweries in Chicago who are making stout like that. Beguile with Imperial pajamas, barrel-aged pajamas. It is very much a stout like that.
Yeah.
They're not like trying to go for this 20 Plato finishing stout, right? So I always kind of hope that kind of return.
So you're pushing also, as you mentioned, for some of those dark fruit characters. Does that impact? I mean, what yeast do you ferment with? Then, there are plenty out there that are going straight kind of Chico West Coast.
Yeah, USO5 Chico.
Okay,
but I can adjust that by just the pitch rate. That's the good thing.
You're not trying to get that character from yeast fermentation as much as you're just doing it with malt.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the good thing about USO5 is that it's very deliberate. Like you can control that so well with the amount you're pitching. It's reliable. The only reason I'm using the dried yeast is because it's just really high gravity fermentations.
A lot of it.
Yeah. High gravity fermentations. And it's a one and done pitch, right? It's just, so, I mean, liquid pitches for stuff like that can get really out of hand really fast. and the beer is already expensive, and it's going to be more expensive because barrels are expensive now. Shipping costs is expensive. Adjuncts are, everything is so expensive. So it's like, if I can save some bucks on some yeast, I know that that's not necessarily like, it's not the driving force behind flavor, but it's just as equally important. Something clean and neutral, and I can kind of turn the knob a little bit in either direction with fermentation schedule, mash rests, mash temps, and just the pitch rates.
Sure. Well, we've been talking for a while now. What we haven't talked about is lager. And, before we finish up here, I want to talk about this new project that you all are undertaking in partnership with Molson and Coors in Texas to, produce and distribute Mexican lager.
Yeah. No shame in talking about this. It's something that we're all really excited about. And sometimes I have to just keep telling myself this. Because, especially from Goose, there's a sensitivity towards big beer where, it's the devil and it's trying to take us all down and blah, blah, blah. And I think Goose has recovered from that. And I think people have kind of seen past all of that.
We're welcoming so many former AB brands back into the craft fold. World. It's an interesting.
It is an interesting
scenario
time.
There. Yeah.
I
would be honest. Like most of my personal problem with big beer really resides with the state by state distributors. That when you find what they're really doing to work against the interests of craft brewers, it's the distributor sides of those business that are engaging in hefty political donations that are trying to cut off the access for small small and independent craft brewers. That is, I think, where most if I were to boil down what I dislike the most, it's really this distributor side of those.
Yeah, it's not the brewery. It's not what's happening in the brew house. It is sales tactics. It's people on the streets. It is, those sales AB, or not necessarily AB, just a lot of these larger brands and their distributors, man, they're rough. They're good. They're good at what they do, but it comes with a lot of aggression and
it's
a lot of territory.
It's not just sharp elbows. It's like knives out. Exactly.
Yeah, and at this point in time, you have to be that way because if you're AB or you're Miller or Sam Adams or whatever, like those really larger companies, like the people on the street, they have to be that way because they are fighting for someone's dollar, and that dollar is really tight right now. So.
Anyways, so there was this opportunity that you all found with, by trying to grow the Cruz Blanca brand
in a different way,
in a different kind of way, and get you back to Texas.
I've had to throughout the years, I've had to come to this understanding that there's that traditional route to success and route to market doesn't work for craft beer anymore. It used to be the brew pub and then the production facility and then the production facility tap room, and like that model still works in some places, but and for some breweries, but it is so hard to do that now and to continue growing because nobody wants to build another brewery. Some people do and some people are, but
there's an immense amount of capacity out there in the brewing world right now. By the most recent, 40+% unused capacity out there in the brewing world. Building another production facility
is scary.
Seems like an unnecessary move. And I think that's a fine line because at the same time, brands without breweries also feel like they're ungrounded. It feels like some piece of the craft gets lost in that. And so you all are still brewing every day and have a team of brewers, here in the brew pub, in addition to growing brands by brewing at partner breweries to make beer on their larger systems at a larger scale that you can then take out to the market, but without losing this love and this craft on a small scale.
Because you can still come here, and any given day, I'm still walking all over this building, and you can still have a conversation with me, or you can have a conversation with Tom, our brewer, or Manny's here, almost very frequently now, and he's always working with the kitchen, and we're having meetings and stuff. So there's always, this is home base. So that traditional route to success and route to market it's changing for a lot of people. We have a co-packer, Great Central, that's about a mile west of us. They do our stuff for the Chicago market. We started shipping beer to Texas a couple of years ago. Our distributor there just didn't work out. So I don't exactly know why Texas. I know that I have roots in Texas. I'm in Texas constantly. Manny, his brother, lives outside of Austin, owns a pickle factory, actually, in Lockhart, where, Texas barbecue has a pickle factory out in Lockhart. Our sales director lives in Austin. So we hired Josh, who's from Ballast Point Constellation. Hired him a couple of years ago, but that was kind of like coming out of COVID. So there was a lot of remote work. And then we have a team of sales reps here that he manages, but he lived in Austin. So there's always something taking any one of us back to Texas.
Sure.
At any given moment. So we're always there. Texas market, I think, works really well for the brand because whereas we do great in the summer, and then right around now is when we can't, when our sales dive.
Sure.
We're a summer brand, and it's, summer 10 months out of the year in Texas. So a brand like Cruz can resonate a lot more in Texas. It just so happened that a neighbor of Manny's works for Molson. We know that we have part of our whole thing is that instead of opening up the production facility and employing 70 people and having it being very risky, when we have a co-packer do it, the margins kind of stay the same because instead of employing this massive staff of people and managing that staff of people and managing the building and the maintenance and the repair and everything that goes into that, we can still keep our team super small and have these co-packers do it for us. And it's not easy. Like we have to manage those relationships just as much as anything else. It's actually kind of harder because then, we have to always, hunting down money, and we're hunting down, getting paid is hard for everyone these days. That traditional route doesn't really work. So it worked out better. We can keep our team really small and we can really keep focused because the last thing that I want to do is spend 30 hours a week managing a team of brewers, which I'm capable of, and I would like to do that at some point in time, but I would rather focus on the beer.
The last thing you want to do is spend the next 2 or 3 years building a facility with a 100 barrel plus brew house to kind of brew at the scale that you would need to feed the Texas market.
It's tough
with that. Yeah.
And
the risk, the capital risk that comes with that too.
Yeah. The capital risk is huge. It just turns out that, Manny, somebody that lives in his neighborhood, he's been professional friends with, is kind of higher up at Molson. Molson headquartered here in Chicago. So they start talking. They're familiar with the brand. We bring up the idea that the fact that hey, we've been in Texas. We want to be in Texas. Just our distributor, just the relationship didn't work out that well. So they kind of get talking, and we've done partnerships with Constellation Brands several years ago with this project called Takayo that was Manny and Rick Bayless's thing. But so we don't turn away from big brands because there's a lot of value and a lot of knowledge in that too. I think that you kind of have to toe the line a little bit, but we've never been against that. So anyway, the conversation kind of happens, and then they're like, well, hey. There's one of these Molson breweries in Texas, has some extra capacity. They're outside of Fort Worth, a brewery called Revolver. They were a Molson acquisition, I don't know, 7 years ago. They're famous for Blood and Honey, and it does pretty well in Texas, but they've got a little bit of extra space. And, there's incentive for everyone to keep production numbers up. We can be now, Texas loves Texas. And what you want in Texas when you produce a product is to have the Go Texan sticker on it because people in Texas want to buy Texas things.
Yes, they do. Yes, Texans love Texas.
Yes, and
they love Colorado too, where I'm from. But
yeah. I mean, Colorado is like where people from Texas go when they don't want to be in Texas, I guess.
Exactly.
They have a lot of pride for Texas things, and that's what you want, right?
Right.
Because when we were shipping to Texas from Chicago. We, it says Chicago on the can. We were, pre-approved for 250 HEB stores, but they won't. A lot of the stores wouldn't take it because, hey, you're not brewed in Texas. So we have the opportunity to be brewed in Texas. Not only that, now we have Molson Coors, at the helm, and the technical conversations that having with Molson has been incredibly beneficial to me. It's been incredibly beneficial for them because we both are bringing things to this brewing relationship that,
sure.
I mean, they are so adamant about matching Chicago's water profile. They're pouring from a very alkaline well. Like that in itself has consumed a ton of our time.
Sure,
and just figuring out water profiles. Their brew house versus what we're doing here. Recipes don't scale linearly. Dry hopping techniques like that has taught so much on both of our ends about figuring things out. Crazy thing about making large scale hazy beers is that it's not that easy when you really start turning 200 barrels at a time consistently. We have it dialed in here in Chicago, but their brew house is different, their water's different. These are all challenges that we've have to constantly kind of work through. So I'm not
sure.
So I'm not exhausted, not necessarily exhausted. So I never run out of technique things to learn. I'm still managing these projects in a very different way. I'm not mashing in myself anymore, but I'm still having to think super critically about these recipes and matching them, what's happening there to here, working with their brew team. They're all super psyched and excited to be working on this project because it's something new for them. They support the brand. They like it. They're incredibly intelligent when it comes to a lot of things that I just don't have. And it goes both ways because, there's a lot of things that they're doing that they haven't done before that, we're having to figure out together. So it's been a good relationship. Mexico calling lager, I was talking about dry hopping and stuff. That's the main beer we're going to with Texas. And again, we're kind of like, we take a play out of Modelo's, we take out of Modelo's playbook every once in a while. And it's like lager especial. Well, that's what Mexico is. It's in Texas, it's like the craft of alternative to Mexican imports. And so far it's going incredibly well. We can still say brewed in Texas. There's a story behind it. We're in Texas frequently. We can still have those good distributor relationships. I could say to anyone, it was funny. I was in Texas a couple of weeks ago and we were doing, like, how do you say it? Like not necessarily an activation, but like a brand. Let's call it an activation. And it was at this place outside in Fort Worth, that big sports kind of watching thing. And we're not really a sports brand, but it worked out. Sure. I mean, sports is huge in Texas, Rangers, playoff, blah, blah, blah. We get talking to these people at the bar and, oh, you guys are from Chicago. And yeah. They're like, oh, okay. Well, why is your beer being brewed here? And, they're kind of, you look like an outlier or like an imposter, right? But then I can kind of say down, my mom lives, up in Round Rock, just north of Austin. They're like, no way. We both work for Round Rock Express, which is the AAA baseball team. We both work for Round Rock Express. That's so cool. And then I'm like, yeah, then, Manny's brother has a pickle factory in Lockhart. And they're like, we live in Lockhart, so you're already like building this connection with people. Sure. So now you don't look like an outlier. You just look like you're one of them. And we all have that. Everyone in our team has that story to tell about Texas. So while we don't have a physical space in Texas, I'm never not going to be a Texan, even though I've been in Chicago for 13 years. And our sales director lives in Austin and we're always in Texas. Right. So, it makes sense for us versus going to Florida or
still comes back to the story and that story and those connections that make it all make sense. Well, we've been talking for quite a long time here, and I appreciate you on this busy start of FOBOB weekend taking this much time to talk about how you brew. Is there this is a big project for you. Is there anything next on the business or creative horizon that you're really excited to tackle? Is there some bubbling creative project maybe that
there always is?
Yeah.
So recently within the pub itself, Jesus, again, going back to managing and how the beer is made, that's something that I always have to think about. But then also internally, managing Texas and then the co-packer down the street and then managing the brew pub. We've just recently went through like a big hospitality shift in terms of partnership that was operating the brew pub because we want to focus on the beer. We have somebody that kind of comes in and for the food, and we kind of lead and guide them. But we had a little turnover with that, and now we're just managing ourselves. And with that managing ourselves, we can we know what Cruz Blanca needs. So we're, our hours of operation are changing. We can we can focus on Cruz a little bit more on the beer, a little bit more on the food. So that in itself requires a lot of time, because now we have staff education. Education is super big. And then, more avenues for sales across and through the brew pub. So next year, the hope is to be able to do a lot more of these like corn grisettes and red corn lagers and stuff, because last year we were, I think, just like so dead set on staying focused that there wasn't a whole lot of creativity happening. And then, we closed for lunch. We, had a really small patio, which we extend the patio during summer. We have tons of sales. So we weren't really moving through pub beer at the same rate as that I would have liked to. So next year, big anticipation is that we're going to move a lot more product through the brew pub. So that gives me more creative turnover to be able to sell more beer. It's kind of business as usual, but still want to work on some cool stuff. Again, Mexico calling and all that commodity stuff. Like, we're going to continue. I continue to work on those recipes and dial it in, but I want to do more grisettes and more mixed culture things. Mixed culture, that's a tough one. That world is struggling right now, at least here in Chicago. But I still want to kind of do stuff like this that's maybe a little less on the acid, more on the dryness, fruited beers. Like we do a lot of those. I don't know. Keep doing the locally inspired things, and just keep trying to make pretty beer.
The big stuff gets bigger, and the small stuff you want to do more of, and keep those things moving at a parallel pace. Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a good place to bring this to a close. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Get natural and economic clarification with Carry Biofine Eco, available exclusively from BSG. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. ProBrew has rotary can fillers in stock with a 2 to 4 week lead time. Omega's stylized yeasts bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. Join the American Homebrewers Association to unlock the 2023 National Homebrew Competition medal-winning recipes, and Lotus Beverage Alliance's team of engineers, brewery consultants, and financial advisors are here to help you. If you've enjoyed this episode and any others, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. We depend on your subscriptions to the magazine. And of course, if you're a subscriber, or if you're not yet a subscriber and you do subscribe, you can go back, dig in, and check out that David Nielsen story on Brewing with Corn with a recipe from Cruz Blanca there for subscribers only. Jacob, if people want to learn more about Cruz Blanca, where do they find you out there in the digital world and here in real life?
Website. It's always good. Mailing letter, newsletter, social, Instagram, Cruz Blanca, chai. There's a Cruz Blanca Texas now, and then there's a Cruz Blanca beer. There's 3 handles, which I don't think I think they're gonna have to merge at some point in time, because it's a lot for people to keep up with. But specifically what's happening here at the brew pub, it's the Cruz Blanca chai handle.
CRUZ, Cruz Blanca. Appreciate you talking with us about brewing today.
Absolutely.
It's been great to get here and great to drink some beer and talk about it with you. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.